Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you are. And thank you for taking the time to join us today as we continue the 2024 NACOLE webinar series. I'm Tina Barr, the Director of Training and Education for the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. Before we get started, I'm going to turn things over to our Executive Director, Cameron McElhaney.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you so much for the opportunity to join today. I've missed being a part of the webinar series, but know that all of you are in great hands with Dr. Barr. I did want to pop in today to remind you that beyond our webinar series, NACOLE is here to support you in the work that you do. Unfortunately, oversight is facing challenges on many fronts, whether it is state-level legislation creating impediments not only to effective oversight, but to oversight as a whole. Whether it is the inability to access the required documents to carry out the mandates you've been given, or whether it's unions and other stakeholders working to block the establishment of effective, sustainable oversight. In a time where strong, transparent, and effective oversight is desperately needed, there are those who are working to diminish the importance of police accountability. I'm sure many of you have heard myself and others at NACOLE say it before. There is so much to do. And while there are many things in the criminal justice system that need to be fixed, unfortunately, civilian oversight cannot fix them all. However, none of them can be fixed without it. It has never been more important to build a foundation of knowledge and resources under you. Knowledge about civilian oversight, knowledge about law enforcement practices, and knowledge about topics like we'll be seeing today, the technology being used by law enforcement agencies. In addition to this webinar series, NACOLE's annual conference will occur this October in Tucson, Arizona. Registration for that event will open later this week. And we've also added our program this year, special forums for board and commission members and executive directors, and we will continue our monthly forums for investigators and quarterly forums for those involved in the oversight of jails and prisons. We're here to be a part of your community of support for the important work that you do. Please don't hesitate to let us know what we can do to help you at any point in time. Thank you again for joining us today and for allowing me a moment of your time. I look forward to seeing all of you at the annual conference, if not before. And Dr. Barr, I'll turn things back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cammie. Okay. So many of you already know, but if any one of you are new to NACOLE and this is your first or one of the first times you're joining us for a webinar, NACOLE is an organization that works to create a community of support for independent civilian oversight agencies seeking to make their local law enforcement agencies, jails, and prisons more accountable, transparent, and responsive to the communities they serve. One part of that effort is this webinar series. Since 2015, NACOLE has worked to bring you information through our webinars on effective practices in civilian oversight, innovations in the field, and efforts to reform the criminal legal system. Now, before we begin, I'd like to go over a few logistics for today. Given the number of people attending the webinar, everyone has entered in listen-only mode. However, you do have the ability to post your questions using the Q&A feature that you see at the bottom of your screen. So you can post your questions at any time. However, to ensure that the speaker has enough time to cover all the information prepared for today, he will answer the questions towards the end of the presentation. If there's a point that is necessary to clarify in the moment, I will alert him to that. Otherwise, post your questions and we will get to them at the end of the webinar. Attendees do have the opportunity to upvote questions, meaning that if you click the little thumbs up icon beside a question, if you would like that question answered, it will move up the queue. That will help us to address the most pressing questions given the limited amount of time that we have for the webinar. Today's webinar will have an additional optional 30-minute post-webinar discussion immediately after the webinar. To join that, I will drop the Zoom link for the meeting towards the end of the webinar in the chat function. While you don't have the ability to use the chat function, I can send you messages for that through that way. And so just be on the lookout for that, and I will announce it at the end of the prepared remarks during the presentation. Finally, just as a reminder, the webinar today is being recorded and will be available for 3 months to everyone who has registered for it. And also, Our speaker has generously provided a PDF or will provide a PDF of the slides today during the webinar. Okay, now that logistics are out of the way, let's turn our attention to what you all really came here for, the webinar. Today's title is called Investigating Police Surveillance Technology. The webinar is a primer on the most common surveillance technologies acquired by police and emerging developments. Also, there will be discussion on practical techniques for investigating abuses of these technologies. Our speaker today is Dave Maas. Dave serves as the Director of Investigations at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, where he researches the use and abuse of police surveillance technology in communities and at the U.S.-Mexico border. Dave is also a scholar in residence at the University of Nevada, Reno, Reynolds School of Journalism, where he leads the Atlas of Surveillance project. Prior to joining EFF, Dave was a reporter for alternative newspapers across the Southwest, covering everything from San Diego Comic-Con to Texas Death Row. In 2014, he was a recipient of NACOLE's contribution to Oversight Award. So Dave, on behalf of NACOLE and everyone joining the webinar today, thank you for being here, and I will turn things over to you so we can get started.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for having me again, and thanks for that lovely introduction. Today I'm going to be talking about police surveillance technology. I have gotten so excited to give this talk to you again. There was an earlier version I did in 2021, but I'm so excited that I put way too many slides into my deck that I'm going to be able to cover. So you'll be able to review them later on to see anything I missed. And so I may hit a point later on in here where I'm like just going to jump ahead so we can make sure we wrap up in time for questions. But for today's talk, I'm going to sort of start by going over some of the trends we've seen in oversight, why this is important to look at technology, and then we're going to just burn through all the different technology developments that we've seen, all the different things that you should be keeping an eye on, and what kind of abuses we've seen with that technology. We'll also go with some of the things that are emerging, some of the things we're seeing in the future, and then I'll go over, some of the kinds of documents and records you're going to want to look for in doing your oversight. And with that, I am going to just jump right into my slide deck. All right, so here we go, investigating police surveillance technology. So if you're unfamiliar with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, where I work, we're a nonprofit that's been around since 1990 that protects civil liberties and human rights as technology grows in society. And we do that through litigation, we do that through computer science and building technology, and we do that through advocacy and grassroots organizing. I'm on our research team at EFF, and so I do a lot of investigating, particularly of police surveillance and other kinds of domestic law enforcement technology. One of the projects I lead is called the Atlas of Surveillance. When you get a chance, check it out. It's atlasofsurveillance.org. And this is a project to try to gather create an inventory of what police departments are using what technologies nationwide. We cover 12 different technologies now. We've collected, I think, about a little more than 10,000 data points, something from, we cover maybe some piece of technology for about 5,500 different law enforcement agencies. It's not comprehensive, but it will give you a lead on what kind of technologies are used in your community. So you can pop in a city, a county, a state, a particular agency, and you'll get a list of everything that we've gathered about that agency. And again, it's not comprehensive, but it will have some sort of information that might be useful to you. We also have a map that you can use to search, say, how face recognition or body-worn cameras or license plate readers are growing across the United States. And so that's something else you can use. One other resource I want to flag for you is our new street-level surveillance hub. That's at sls.eff.org. And a lot of the things I talk about today and even more information will be available on this website. You can click on any of these icons and learn more about the different technologies being used. Okay, so let's talk about the growing movement for oversight of surveillance technology and police technology in general. So one of the things that has happened over the last maybe 5 or 6 years is the development of these kinds of ordinances called community control over police surveillance. These were developed by the ACLU to start. We've jumped on and helped them a lot with these. You might also hear them referred to as surveillance equipment regulation ordinances. But generally, this framework has 4 components. One is that when a police department wants to acquire a surveillance technology, they have to write their policy in advance, and they have to conduct a privacy assessment in advance. And once they have those two documents, they have to go to an elected body and in a public meeting go over it. And that elected body can reject the technology. They can ask for amendments to the policy. Members of the public have a chance to weigh in. And then once they acquire the technology, the agency needs to report annually on its use. How effective was it? Were there any harms associated with it? What was the actual cost of the technology? Now, those are the three main components of these ordinances. In some places, the ordinances actually do create a civilian surveillance oversight body. So, for example, in Oakland and in San Diego, there are a group of civilians who do research the technology, write guidance on the policies, and recommendations on what the city council should do. This is very similar to your traditional your traditional civilian oversight body, but they don't tend to handle complaints. That's one of the big differences. So here's just a list of places that have passed these kinds of ordinances. You can see they're very concentrated in California and Massachusetts, and that's just because that's reflective of the organized efforts in those communities. There's just a lot of organizations, a lot of motivation to pass them one by one in these areas where you have multiple municipalities like the Bay Area or in certain places in Massachusetts. Sometimes cities and states go even further. They don't just regulate the technology, they might straight up ban some of the technology. The most common one we see banned is face recognition. And again, Massachusetts and California are among the most common for these kinds of bans. But we also see other kinds of bans of other kinds of technologies, like predictive policing is banned in various places as well. Now, one of the things that has happened since the last time I gave this talk in 2021 is that there's been actually kind of a backlash against these. You probably have seen a similar backlash against police reforms that happened in the wake of the George Floyd protests. Same thing has happened with surveillance. New Orleans had a ban on face recognition. They revoked that ban. Virginia had a statewide ban on face recognition. They lifted that. California had a moratorium on face recognition being used on body-worn cameras. They were unable to extend that moratorium. And then most recently in San Francisco, we had a huge defeat where Mayor London Breed got a ballot initiative that significantly weakened many police reform measures, including surveillance. And similarly, something happened in San Diego that shortly after they passed a surveillance oversight law, they actually just went and reined it in at the city council level just a couple of months later. I'm going to talk about why I feel like surveillance technology is important for any kind of oversight, not just civilian oversight, but for journalists, for members of the public, for citizen watchdogs. I do this presentation a lot for student journalists, and that's kind of how I think about it a lot. I try to tell them, like, why is it in the public interest to look at surveillance technology? And I've broken it into 5 categories. One is freedom. Our traditional freedoms that we value, like freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom to organize. All of these can be harmed by surveillance. Surveillance can quash dissent. It can chill people from engaging in their religious beliefs. Just your general, constitutional freedoms. With privacy, we're talking about things that are private to you that are really just not the government's business. They may not be controversial. They may not be as noble as freedom of the press. It may just be your medical conditions. It may be who you're dating. It may be where you're sleeping at night. That just isn't anybody's business, but the government, by collecting data with surveillance, is actually documenting that. Justice, kind of a two sides of a coin here. Surveillance technology is certainly used in the criminal justice system to investigate and prosecute people, but a mistake made by surveillance technology can bring an innocent person into the criminal justice system. It can have those kinds of injustices. It can also result in a disproportionate kind of justice being applied to certain communities. Security is also a double-sided coin. You're probably familiar with security cameras being in, your banks and your, pharmacies and things like that. And certainly people believe that surveillance technology can enhance security. But it can also create a security risk, particularly a cybersecurity risk. Anytime you have a new technology, it could be hacked, it can be breached, and then your data can get out in the world. And then, of course, we have your standard waste, fraud, and abuse. This stuff costs a lot of money. It doesn't necessarily do anything. There can be bribery, there can be fraud, and police can use this technology for their own personal gain or for their own personal vendettas. So this is probably the longest couple of slides I'm going to hover on for a bit. I've written a sort of series of 12 questions that when a technology comes up to you or comes before your body, what sort of questions you should be asking. So first off the bat, what kind of data is being collected by this technology? Is it video? Is it audio? Is it documenting license plates? Is it capturing biometric information like face scans and your body shape? How and where is the data being collected? Like if it's cameras, where are they going to be placed? And why were those places chosen? Once they have the data, how long is that data stored and when is it deleted? And why did they decide on that kind of retention period? Now, obviously, we want to ask about what are the impacts on vulnerable communities. A lot of different communities can be harmed, particularly traditionally over-policed communities. Now, police may not have an answer to this question. It may be something you need to dig into and you need to answer. Now, another question for police are what are the defined purposes for which a system may be accessed or searched? What is the legal standard? Can a police search it with a warrant or can they search it for any reason whatsoever? Is there any requirement that they reach reasonable suspicion or any of those kind of standards before using a surveillance technology? One big emerging thing is artificial intelligence involved? Is there some sort of autonomous decision process going on with that technology? So another one is just to ask the police, like, how do you measure the technology's effectiveness? How are we going to go back later and say whether this technology did its job or not? How did it fulfill the promises you made when you adopted this technology? Who can access the system? Like, is it just any police officer? Is it administrative staff who can access it? Or is it only certain trained people? Is there some sort of gatekeeping going on? What kind of training do they receive and who's giving that training? Is it coming from somebody in the civil liberties community or is it coming from the vendor? We also want to know how the system is audited for misuse and whether those results are going to be public. One of the questions you might want to have for the company is whether that technology has ever been breached before or whether they have a history of unauthorized access. And by that, I mean people who are not supposed to have access to the system gaining access to the data. Obviously, we want to know how much the system is going to cost and where that money is coming from. Is it coming out of tax dollars? Is it coming from asset forfeiture? Is it coming from a police foundation? Because that money often has strings attached to it or can actually influence how the technology is used or misused. And then finally, what are the transparency mechanisms? What information is going to be shared with the public and what information is going to be subject to public records laws? Now I'd like to talk about some of the common problems that we encounter, and then I'm going to get into the good stuff. What are these specific technologies? Now, some of the common problems is that these technologies are just philosophically negative in the fact that they are mass surveillance, in that they capture information on every single person, regardless of whether you've committed a crime, which is just inherently, against the values we have as a country and as democracies have. Errors. Surveillance technology can make a mistake, and when an algorithm makes a mistake, that is an innocent person being impacted. Over-reliance. Police will automatically assume that the technology is correct and use that as justification to do whatever they wanted to do because the algorithm said this is what you need to believe, and they don't need to apply their own common sense. We can have a disproportionate application. So if you put cameras in, say, mostly Black communities, that is going to result in a different kind of policing for those communities and a data cycle where more data is coming in, resulting in over-policing of that community. You might also have it in the other way around, where wealthier neighborhoods or high-end retail businesses are getting better levels of service because they have more surveillance in their communities. You might have mission drift, where a technology is, purchased saying we're going to use this for terrorism or Amber Alerts, but then later on you just find out it's used for jaywalking or to prosecute homeless people for sleeping on the sidewalk. Can also skew priorities. Police may gravitate towards the crimes most easily solved with surveillance data. Some of the technologies are very good for vehicular crimes, but maybe vehicular crimes like hit and runs or car thefts are not the most important crime affecting your community, but yet police are going to gravitate towards that because they've got the technology that is better for that crime. There are also racial and socioeconomic impacts. Can often disproportionately harm people of color in a myriad of ways, which I'll go over as we go through the technologies. It can also just have a chilling effect on the community. It can discourage freedom of expression and freedom of the press if people know they're being watched. Police will often keep this stuff secret, even from the courts. There have been cases where prosecutors have dropped criminal prosecutions rather than reveal the methods that were used in the investigation. Misuse, again, police can use, bad actors in a police agency or rogue officials might use that technology to go after their political enemies, to stalk their ex-partners, to do any kind of, to even accept bribes to give information to criminal elements. Waste, again, can be a poor use of public money. It can also be profit motivated. The vendors who are selling this, they want to make money. And so a lot of these times they're selling things to law enforcement with these huge promises because they want to sell it. And ultimately those decisions are being made in back rooms, where police are being wined and dined rather than actually responsive to what the community needs out of their police department. Cybersecurity, these things can be hacked, they can be breached, and that can put people at risk. Okay, let's talk about the technologies now. Now, the first one I'm going to deal with is going to be one that you're all too familiar with, body-worn cameras. Now, you may think of these primarily as an accountability measure, and certainly that is how they entered police departments. Became widespread during the Obama administration. You know the deal with body-worn cameras. They're supposed to be an accountability tool, but that's not what they are anymore. Law enforcement is applying more and more sophisticated technologies to these, automated video analysis, face recognition. There are some systems where somebody in a real-time crime center can access those cameras in real time and watch them. I'll talk about that again in a little bit. But yeah, these are actually fundamentally changing and turning police officers into walking surveillance cameras. Now, through the Atlas of Surveillance, we've documented 4,600 police departments with body-worn cameras. That's definitely under-inclusive. We keep adding them all the time. It's probably closer to, I think, maybe 10,000 in the end, but that's just me guessing, doing a little back-of-the-napkin guess. But to just sort of illustrate how police are starting to think about these, this is an advertisement from Police Chief Magazine, and you can see they are straight up marketing these now as wearable surveillance. These are not talking about accountability anymore. It is talking about these being surveillance. Just giving an example of how this stuff might be abused. So back in 2020, during the protests that were going on, one of the things that would happen is police would just not interfere with the protest, just document everything with their body-worn cameras. Then weeks later, they would go through the footage and find people that they wanted to prosecute. And people really believed that these were politically motivated arrests because there wasn't any violence going on. There weren't any crimes to stop in the moment. They just went back weeks later, decided this was a priority. Moving on to drones. You're probably familiar with drones. 10 years ago, these were things you found in a few agencies. Now they're all over the place. And most of the time, police have been using these to document crime scenes and accident scenes after the fact. Sometimes they do surveil protests or large gatherings. They'll use them in emergency situations like SWAT and hostage situations. Do some search and rescue. They'll do some long-term like sting operations as well with these. We've documented 1,500 agencies so far with drones. Again, we still have a ways to go. It's probably closer to 2,000 in the end. But the thing I want to highlight is the big change since the last time I gave this talk in 2021 is the growth of drone as first responders programs, or DFR. This is the Chula Vista Police Department, and they have this dashboard that you can see how the program works and what it does. But essentially, drones as first responders means buying a fleet of drones and responding to calls for service or 911 calls with a drone first before peace officers arrive on the scene. The idea here is that drones are going to be able to scope out the scene first, give better situational awareness, one of the things that we hear from law enforcement is that they believe this is going to result in better outcomes from police encounters because police will have an idea and will know if somebody's dangerous before they show up. So they're not coming in guns blazing. Or in some cases, they can show up and say, oh, well, this is something we don't actually have to send peace officers to. We can send some sort of community representative or social worker to the scene instead. I don't know if that's going to prove to be true in the end, but I do find it a compelling thing to think about. If you look at this chart here, you can see Chula Vista has given a pie chart of how what they respond to. And you can see that 5150 evaluations, which are mental health evaluations, account for 14% of the drones as first responders. Now, they do claim here on the right that you can see that since 2018, they claim that by sending a drone, they have avoided dispatching a patrol unit 4,200 times. I'm a little skeptical of this, but it is worth keeping an eye on to see how it actually plays out. Because one of the things that has, become clear to us is that, they might say that these are going to be used for emergency situations, but once you start looking at the data, so if Chula Vista releases its flight plans, or its flight paths, you do see that frequently they're sending out drones for vandalism cases, crimes of poverty like homelessness, persons sleeping on the sidewalk, a lot of mental health cases. Frequently, it is going out for these lower level crimes as opposed to the higher level crimes. And it makes me wonder whether they would have even have sent police out to this in the first place, or if they're only now addressing it because they have a drone that can go instead. I'm going to put a lot of text in some of these slides so for you to read later. Don't feel like you need to read this on the screen, but I do want to talk about a case out of Chula Vista with a reporter named Arturo Castañares, who wanted to see all of the drone video footage from these Chula Vista drones as first responders to see how it invaded people's privacy. And Chula Vista said, no, you can't have it. We're going to exempt everything under your public records request. It's worth noting that the high courts in California agreed with Castañares and have agreed that he does get access to the footage, or at least some of it. They said that the Chula Vista needs to decide which part of these files are investigative, and then which ones are just factual inquiries, and that third category needs to be released. Here's a list of law enforcement agencies with drone programs. This started in Chula Vista and has sort of spread like a virus throughout California. But we can see that there are places throughout the rest of the country where this is being adopted. Moving on to face recognition. This is one of the more controversial technologies. Face recognition works like fingerprinting, but it does it for your face. It measures various points like the distance between your eyes and your nose to create a print of your face that they can then match to other images to try to find out your identity. We've identified 890 agencies with face recognition, and you'll see that we've got concentrations in Wisconsin and Florida. That's more of because we have good data for those places, not because those places necessarily use it more than others. In Wisconsin and Florida, there's just a special regional or statewide face recognition database that all agencies get to access. And so that's why we were able to do that, because they each have like desktop access. In Arizona, the DMV has a face recognition system, and any law enforcement agency can ask them to query it, but those agencies don't necessarily have direct access to that face recognition system. So face recognition is used in kind of three main ways that we've documented. One is identity confirmation. You say you are this person. They use face recognition to confirm that you are that person. If you've ever been through TSA and they've asked you to do face recognition, that is what we're talking about. But this also often happens at booking at jails. Forensic use, that means they have a piece of evidence like a still from a surveillance camera, something, somebody who's in a social media picture, and they will run that against a database to try to figure out who that person is. And then real-time surveillance is using face recognition on live cameras that are identifying everybody who comes in the frame, or at least attempts to identify them. And so we're going to see face recognition, on workstations at headquarters. There might be mobile devices that police have that they can use to do face recognition. And again, you might actually have it directly attached to security cameras. Now, face recognition does make mistakes. Every time we've seen a case of somebody being wrongfully accused by face recognition, it is almost always a Black person and almost always a Black male. And this happens frequently in Detroit, where their system is being used quite aggressively, but that's not the only place we've seen it. Now this technology, automated license plate readers, it's going to be the one I talk about the most because I find it to be the most offensive of surveillance technologies out there. These are cameras that take a picture of your license plate and document when and where it was seen, and then add it to a database that is searchable. Now, you don't actually have to have this hardware yourself. Police, you can actually piggyback on other police departments who are collecting data, or you can buy it from private parties as well. We usually see three main configurations. We'll see license plate readers attached to fixed locations, like on the left. You might also see those referred to as stationary locations, so street lights, telephone poles. We also see mobile license plate readers, so usually attached to patrol cars. And then you see, relocatable, let's call it relocatable or trailer-based license plate readers, where you have it attached to like a speed limit sign, and then those are moved around to capture wherever the police department needs things captured at a given time. We've documented 1,500 agencies using license plate readers around the country, and this continues to grow. This is one of the fastest growing technologies in the United States. Now, this is a slide from the Chandler Police Department, and I just wanted to sort of show you one of the worst ways I've seen this used. So in Chandler and other places, they tell police when you've got nothing else to do. So when you're doing, having what they call 10-8 time, do something called gridding. And what gridding is driving up every block of a neighborhood and gathering the license plates of parked cars there. And you can see in one of the sort of alarming lines in here is they call this gathering intel. In my view, it is not the police department's job to gather intel on people. It is to solve crimes and to investigate crimes that have happened, not to gather intel on future crimes, which is exactly the terminology they use here, future cases. This is just gathering data on everyone. Now, if you have more police officers assigned to, say, a poorer community or a Latino community or a Black community, they're going to end up capturing more data on those communities than, say, the white folks on the rich side of town. So how are ALPRs used? Well, police can add your vehicle to a hot list, and they can get alert every time your vehicle is seen. They can drive around with a list of cars on a hot list and get pinged if your car is nearby. They can look at historical travel patterns. They can go into the database and look back where your car has seen going back sometimes years. Some places only keep data for 30 days. Some keep for a year or 2 years. Customs and Border Protection holds on to data for 15 years. They can query what vehicles were seen near a particular address. So type in an address of a place and see. They can see what cars were seen near each other, so to map networks. They can ask the algorithm to predict where your car might be seen. And then one thing we do see is that this data is shared so widely across the country that places in California might have access to data in New York. Now, these things make mistakes all the time. This is the saddest case I've ever seen. A license plate reader in Aurora, Colorado made a mistake. It resulted in a car full of Black children, including this like 4-year-old girl with a pink princess crown being pulled out of the car and made to lay on the sidewalk. This was all just because the ALPR made a mistake and the police did not verify it. There's a piece that came out just a few days ago from North Carolina about license plate reader mistakes. So I just love this quote, or I don't love it, but it's very telling, from a Black woman in Fayetteville who said that I felt like I didn't have any help. I felt like the moment I stepped out of my car, I was automatically guilty. And this was just based on a misuse of a license plate reader and police relying on that to assume that somebody was the suspect when they weren't. There was a second case in that piece from Charlotte, and this one I really want to just sort of highlight. If we have any Charlotte CRB people here, this was a great example of a citizens review board really investigating how license plate readers were used. So CMPD put in essentially a license plate number or the name of a person who was the wrong person into a system, got a hit on where that vehicle was, and just showed up, guns out, and really scared the heck out of this woman because they misused or over-relied on the license plate reader system. The board did recommend that 2 officers who had been exonerated actually be disciplined. This board went through and dug through the whole process. Who had given the wrong name? Who had put the wrong name into the license plate reader system? Who had failed to correct it when they realized that this was the wrong person? Just a really great example of how this can play out. Now, the police did not discipline these officers, but they did take additional actions to improve how they use ALPR in that city. Now, ALPR has been breached in the past. Customs and Border Protection's license plate reader system was breached and people's information was put online. And so if CBP can be breached, basically anyone can. There's also cases of police misusing the system. So in Ketchie, in Kansas, one officer used a license plate reader system to monitor his estranged wife. He wasn't even using the Ketchie license plate readers. He was accessing the Wichita Police Department's license plate reader because Wichita shares with Ketchie. One company I want to highlight for you is Flock Safety. It used to be a company called Vigilant Solutions, which has been acquired by Motorola Solutions, was the biggest company selling license plate readers, but now it's Flock Safety, and they actually started going after homeowners associations first. So now homeowners associations install these cameras and then share that data. And they don't just do license plate readers, they do what's called vehicle fingerprinting. They actually grab the make, model, color of the car, whether it has license plates. And now they are actually adding on additional technologies, such as technology to identify gunshots. One thing I find interesting about Flock is that they have this catchphrase that their mission is to eliminate all crime. And so we asked them, as did The Guardian, like, when you're talking about all crime, are you say, like, if you're operating in Georgia, are you where, or any state that has criminalized abortion, are you now saying you're going to eliminate abortion with your crime and with your technology? And sure enough, they said, well, you know what? We're here to eliminate crime, and we don't care what the laws are about what is a crime and isn't a crime. We're just going to do that. And this creates a huge problem for cross-state data sharing. So one thing that we've done at EFF is that in California, it is against the law to interfere with somebody's access to abortion. And so we went and we looked at what are called data sharing reports, who California agencies are sharing their license plate reader data with. And we found that there were lots of agencies sharing with states with abortion bans, so particularly Arizona. So this one here shows, you can see Yuma County's on here, Pinal County, and some of these sheriffs have actually expressed very, very anti-abortion positions in their political campaigns. Thankfully, we did get we did influence the California Department of Justice, and the Attorney General did issue a guidance saying that state law does not allow them to share this data out of state. And so now dozens of law enforcement agencies have cut off sharing to other states, especially those agencies that are in abortion ban states. Gunshot detection is another technology. ShotSpotter is one of the main ones. Flock Safety now also offers it. But this, purports to be able to hear where a gunshot went off and then triangulate it and alert police that, hey, a gunshot happened here. We've got 183 agencies in our database that are using this technology. But, this technology, while they claim to be very accurate, really that's just a marketing ploy. And they've actually admitted that in court. Research in San Diego found that these things sent police officers to false alarms more often than they were supposed to, and San Diego actually ended that program. But we've also had cases where ShotSpotter has put innocent people into the criminal justice system, like a very, very famous case out of Illinois in Chicago, and Chicago is also supposed to be ending its ShotSpotter program. So one of the things that activists have pointed out, I'm just going to read you this line from We the People of Michigan, is they said, let's be clear about what ShotSpotter does. The technology sends police falsely expecting a shootout into Black, brown, and poor communities where microphones are secretly embedded. And that's something to notice, is that it might be a good thing, you might think, for police to know where gunshots have gone off, but really that just sends police thinking that they're about to enter a gun battle, and that can result in people being shot when there actually is no reason. There would have been a better way to de-escalate. Predictive policing is a technology that allows police to identify either people that they think are going to commit crimes or areas where they believe crimes are going to occur. This is pretty much junk science to me. This is technology that it reinforces existing biases. We still have 200 agencies that are using this. Tennessee is highlighted here because they have a statewide program for predicting drunk driving and collisions. But in Pasco County, Florida, they created their own algorithm for predicting who was going to commit crimes. And it was just a reason, gave them an excuse to harass families until they either found a reason to prosecute them or the families moved away. We're also seeing the prevalence of what are called real-time crime centers. These are these huge facilities where they have walls of cameras. You have analysts who are looking through social media and license plate readers and ShotSpotter and all these different technologies. And it's just a completely different form of policing that is now starting to emerge. When we looked at this a couple of years ago, there were maybe 70 of these. We've now documented 150 agencies who have set up real-time crime centers across the country. Sometimes they do this secretly. So Denver started its real-time crime center, and nobody knew about it until we discovered, and actually one of my interns discovered a job listing for it. So let's talk about surveillance camera networks, and I'm really trying to burn through here to make sure we are able to cover stuff. I may go 5 minutes or so over, and hopefully I don't get the hook on that. You might think of surveillance cameras as something that is, broadcasting video to some security booth where nobody's really paying attention or it's just going on VHS. That's not the case anymore. We have what are called pan-tilt zoom cameras where somebody actually has a remote control and is able to zoom in or look around. We also have these AI cameras or cameras that are these networked together that are allowed. Actually, I'll talk about those more in a second. These can also be problematic. A story worth reading from a few days ago had, Philly officers in Philly were actually able to access these cameras through their smartphone apps and control them through their phones. And it turned out that they were using that for investigating people, but then they were actually lying about what happened and hiding the video evidence from public defenders. Now, video analytics, this is something that's being increasingly attached to surveillance cameras, where you have an AI that's able to track objects as they move through cameras and just see what path they take from camera to camera to camera. They might also start analyzing what's in the footage. Is it a white person? Is it a black person? Are they bald? Are they wearing glasses? Which is essentially just a form of like digital racial profiling. We're also seeing the growth of camera registries where members of the public are able to register their camera and say, hey, I have a camera at this location. But they're also more increasingly giving police live access to those cameras through a software called Fusus, which we'll talk about in a moment. We've got 530 agencies across the country with camera registries in our database. Smart streetlights, this is really something that's going on in San Diego right now, and maybe emerging across the country. And these are just streetlights that are outfitted with all kinds of sensors. Now in San Diego, this program was shut down after there were a lot of privacy concerns. Police had used these to investigate protesters. Even after the system was canceled, they found that the vendor wouldn't even turn off the cameras. There was no way to shut them off. But just last year, San Diego decided to revive the streetlight program and pair them up with license plate readers. So now not only do they have those sensors, now they also are doing license plate reading across the state. Just a sort of random thing, I actually asked for a bunch of records related to this, including audits of the license plate readers. And I've gotten audits of license plate readers from hundreds of agencies across the country. But San Diego came back very recently with this exemption I've never seen before. They are claiming they do not have to hand over audits because those are peace officer personnel records. We're going to be fighting that, but just keep an eye out. If you ever hear of this sort of thing happening, definitely let me know. I'm going to jump through a few things here. I want to talk to you about a couple other things. So one technology we've recently discovered is called fog data science, where this is a service that is buying phone location that is meant for advertising. So advertisers are able to, serve ads on people based on where their phone is at a given time. So like you're next to my McDonald's, I'm going to serve you with a McDonald's advertisement. Fog data has been purchasing that data and then reselling it to law enforcement to give people their location. So here's an example of what their interface looks like. I'm going to jump ahead to emerging technologies just because I only have a few minutes left here. Maybe during the Q&A, I can jump back to others, or, if we don't have any Q&A at all, I can jump back. So a few emerging technologies that are on the horizon or that are being growing right now. Fusus. So people are adopting this all over the country. This company was just bought by Axon. What this software does is network all of the cameras available to a law enforcement officer. So it will be surveillance cameras owned by the city. They might get access to cameras owned by private people. They might even get access to body-worn cameras. So this is from a presentation I was at the International Chiefs of Police Conference, where the Royal Bahamas Police Chief, live in front of the audience, logged into his Fusus account, clicked on a police officer driving around the city in Nassau, and we were able to watch this officer's body-worn camera video live. And so when you're interacting with a police officer, that's not just that going on a record anymore. There might be somebody behind that camera watching from some real-time crime center, or in fact, a total nation away, as was the case at this conference. We're also seeing robots get more and more adopted. So two of the main things we're seeing are these what are called robot dogs or quadrupedal robots. New York has purchased some of these. They're from a company called Boston Dynamics. There's another company called Ghost Robotics that is also selling these. On the right are Nightscope. I call them robot pickles, but they patrol parking garages or malls or that kind of thing, gathering all sorts of video and license plate readers and other kinds of information. Not necessarily surveillance technology in itself, but Axon just a week or two ago rolled out AI-generated police reports. They now have software that is going to listen to body-worn camera audio, write up the police report for the officer. There will be parts where the officer needs to fill in things and correct things. And so as citizen oversight people, you're going to see this happen more and more because everyone is going to have access to this because everyone is using some sort of Axon product. And so we might see these boilerplate things which are making mistakes that police just aren't catching anymore. There is supposed to be an audit log for each one of these, so you should be able to jump back and see what changes a police officer made to a police report. One thing I'm fascinated with, and here you can see me in a virtual reality headset with a model gun, is the growth of virtual reality police trainings. So following the George Floyd protest, there's been a ton of money pumped into combating, bias training and use of force training. And all of these tech companies have jumped in being like, let's cash in on all that money. Let's come up with these virtual reality programs. And, as citizen oversight, volunteers and professionals, you really should see if you can get into these trainings and see what people are being taught. Because oftentimes these are coming from companies with another motivation. So Axon and RAP, for example, both offer VR trainings, but both of them also offer less lethal weaponry to police. And so is the Axon training actually teaching people how to de-escalate and how to not be biased? Or is it teaching them how to be better at firing a taser? Same thing with RAP, which has these like rope things that they fire out to tie up people. Is it actually for de-escalation, or is it to show them how to fire a weapon? And then something to look out for the future. So this is something that I've seen proposed in Police Chief Magazine by Pacific Northwest National Lab, is this fantasy vision of having a digital police officer, that a police officer is driving around and there's this AI buddy who's deploying drones and searching social media and looking at license plate reader data and taking over the police officer's car and recommending how to intercept a suspect. this is, to me, is totally silly, but the fact that it was in Police Chief magazine means that people are actually looking at making this a reality. We're also seeing the rise of police tech mega companies. These companies are all consolidating. Companies that would offer one technology or another, now they're just scooping up all these different technologies and selling them as packages to police. I actually heard an executive from Axon referring it to the Amazon primification of law enforcement technology. Just give police all these different things, some of which they didn't even ask for, just sell them all as a big package. All right, now for the final section, and hopefully I'm sort of kind of at time, but I think I only have about 5 minutes of content left on this, so hopefully we can get through it. So the challenge for civilian oversight bodies when it comes to technology, well, first is people usually know when they've been physically, sexually, or verbally abused by police. They know when they've been unlawfully detained. They know when they're innocent and being accused of a crime, but they may not know when the abuse is digital. It may be invisible. Something might have happened to them that they thought was weird or wrong, but they don't know where it came from. And oftentimes that might be because there's technology working in the background against them. Another thing to note is that, like, especially at EFF, but I know other folks will often get contacted by people who are having mental health crises, experiencing paranoid delusions, and those delusions might manifest in these ideas about surveillance, that there are drones flying over their house all the time, their phones are being tapped, all of these things that are improbable, if not impossible. But I would just caution you that if you have somebody who's complaining about these seeming delusions about surveillance, that does not mean that they are not victims of police abuse. Something may have happened to them and they may be filling in the gap with surveillance. So just keep that in mind. So when you're going through documents or police statements, there are definitely some red flag phrases. If you see things like data-driven policing, intelligence-led policing, real-time criminal intelligence, all of those should be a red flag that there is some sort of creepy technology being used. They will also use like weasel phrases like, I ran somebody through a database. You need to ask, what database? Like, what did you actually run through? Did you run a photo? Did you run a license plate? And what database did you run that through? Another thing I see a lot is that in a police report, they might say, we located a vehicle, or a vehicle was located, using passive voice without describing how they actually located the vehicle. Did they use a license plate reader? Did they use face recognition? What actually was the method? So things that you can do, look for accountability measures and laws. There are going to be laws that have very buried, boring transparency elements, like requirements that it's Washington State, if you use like a cell phone tracking device, you have to disclose that to the courts. In Maryland, there has to be an annual disclosure of license plate reader data to the legislature, including audits. That is just buried on the legislative website. I seem to be the only person who knows it exists. Same thing with policies and practices and SOPs. There may be things that are kind of like less noticed in there where they might describe how the technology is used, how it is logged, what kind of audits there might be. Really ask the question of what kind of paper trail does this require? Oftentimes it'll be a usage log, and even unstated, there might be a usage log when it's been used or accessed, when it's been checked in and out of storage, when it's been transferred to one department or another. Here's an example of what that might look like for license plate readers. We were able to get data exported from the law enforcement officers at the Department of Human Assistance. This is the welfare fraud office at Sacramento County. And we could actually see per officer or per staff member how many times over a period of time they queried the license plate reader database. And we were able to get every single query, what they actually were kind of looking for, what kind of search they were running. Audits. Now, every agency should be doing audits of these technologies. Oftentimes they don't. And oftentimes when they do, they're not very robust, but they can still be pretty helpful. So, for example, here's Annapolis's audit of license plate readers, and you can see there's a whole bunch on here that just say incomplete note 2. And this means, if you look at this sort of footnote, that means that the officer never put in a case number, couldn't reproduce why they ran the search. But, the police department said, well, the officer said it was a legitimate query, so we're going to assume it was. I wouldn't assume it was. You probably wouldn't assume it was, but the police chief gave the police officer the benefit of the doubt. Presentations, any kind of training materials, anything they give at conferences, things that academic institutions give out, those are super useful. That's how we learned so much about Fog Reveal, that phone tracking technology, because they put everything we needed to know about it in a presentation that they gave directly to a police department in California. One thing I find very interesting is going through, say, the New York Police Department's face recognition PowerPoint. Because, when I need to explain racial bias to, say, journalism students, I ask them to go look at this presentation and count how many black faces are in the examples. Spoiler alert, all but 2 of the images in all of these slides are of black people. And I don't think that is a coincidence. I think that is another way to measure racial bias in the New York Police Department when it comes to surveillance technology. Vendor manuals are also excellent. If you can obtain one of those, that might tell you a lot about how the technology, how it operates and what kind of data you can get. So for example, with video analytics, we found, so here are 3 different things we found from it. We found that if you have that system, a police officer can go in with their mouse, circle somebody's face, and the system will show them whenever that person's face has been on video. You can even go in and say, I want to see, so the bottom left here, it's like, I want to see somebody who's wearing a red shirt and blue jeans, and it'll pull everybody out of that who's wearing a red shirt and blue jeans. And I didn't even know that one of these had a feature where it would tell police when unusual activity was going on. What is unusual activity? That's a meaningless term, but yet this algorithm is going to tell cops there's something unusual going over there. You should respond. And it might very well be that somebody's just doing something totally innocuous. Procurement and purchasing records, I find those often very, very useful. There will be interesting information that you did not expect in there, particularly like there'll be buried things in there that say police can't say certain things about the technology. They can't release certain information without getting permission from the vendor first. Sometimes you can get geographical data sets where surveillance cameras are located or where it's been collected. And that can be really helpful. So Type Investigations did an analysis of the camera network in St. Louis. People in St. Louis were supportive of this because there was a problem with gun crime and homicides, particularly in Black communities. The Black community was somewhat supportive about setting up this network to help address them. But when reporters went and looked at where the cameras were located, they found that the cameras were frequently placed in not so Black neighborhoods, but neighborhoods where there was a lot of retail and businesses. And so businesses were actually benefiting from the camera system rather than the communities who've been promised better police coverage. And the final thing is that if you can't get stuff directly from law enforcement, if they won't hand it over to you voluntarily, even though you're on a citizens review board, go to the Public Records Act, go to the Freedom of Information Act, whatever you have, because that will force them to give that over to you. But there are hundreds of people around the country who are also interested in this, who are filing their own requests for surveillance technology. If you go over to muckrock.com, that is a place where a lot of people use to file these requests, and you can find all sorts of documents that other people have filed all over. I find it very useful, and I think you will as well. So here's my email address if you have anything. I left my Twitter handle up here. I guess it's X now. I don't use it very much. But alas, I did have some slides I skipped, and I know I talked really fast, but I can answer questions now. Tina, sorry for going a few minutes over, but hopefully I covered most of it.
Yep, that's fine. And actually, Dave, I'm going to put the Zoom link for the post-webinar discussion in. I'll drop that now. So hopefully by the time you answer some questions, everyone will have had a chance to copy that. And so we can move over to that after you've asked questions. So everyone, I am going to post that. But don't log on until we finish this webinar to the discussion. So Dave, if you look at the bottom of your screen, the Q&A, you can pull that up. I'll remove, let's see, a couple of comments that aren't really questions, but you can see the questions. And
yeah, so I'll start with Christopher's. So Christopher asked, given Hertz settled 168 million for falsely accusing customers of stealing cards, What safeguards are there around officers' basis for stops when using this technology? Okay, so I've been very interested in this Hertz stuff. I have not seen any definitive evidence that the Hertz stuff was tied to license plate readers, but I fully expect that it was. And if anybody knows, I would love to hear about that. What I have heard are several cases, particularly in California, where a rental car company has reported that a vehicle was stolen, not reported to police when it was recovered, and so then the next person driving it was hit by a license plate reader as a stolen vehicle, and then they were not arrested, but taken into custody and detained. There's actually the Contra Costa County Sheriff in California was actually sued and had to pay up money because they had done this to actually a local privacy advocate. In terms of safeguards, I mean, police really need to define and come up with hard definitions on when they're going to add something to a hot list. And they should not be accepting these huge data sets from rental car companies because rental companies are not professionals in this regard. They are not very good at removing people from lists. There's no real accountability for them. So I would say that's the main thing, is that they really need to be hard definitions that they say, we are only going to add things to the hot list if it's involved with a directly reported stolen vehicle with a police report attached to it. We're only going to do it if a crime is like, we're talking about a murder or an assault or, specific category of crimes, and not just adding anything to their list. So Christopher also asks about the CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act. Not really for law enforcement. That law does not offer a lot of protection for law enforcement surveillance technology. Where it might add protection is when it comes to third-party providers of data. So if there's a company like Fog Data or a company like LexisNexis or something, you should be able to, if you're a California resident, go and file a request with the particular company and ask what kind of information they have on you. And you do have the ability to ask them to delete it or to correct it. So a little bit, very limited, and it has not been fully explored, but there is something there. So should I just keep going down the list in order?
Yeah, and then I would say if we can do these rather quickly, then we can jump on over to the discussion so that people can have more direct engagement with you.
Excellent. So some things are pretty easy. So are you familiar with how ShotSpotter located people who have been shot and were sent to medical treatment? Or in Chicago, where they were located, 2 officers who were returning home were found early because of ShotSpotter. Does the EFF offer services to police departments to evaluate their policies? Okay, so I am familiar with that, and I do feel like one of the compelling arguments for ShotSpotter is that if it can get EMTs quicker to the scene to save people's lives who've been shot. That is compelling in theory, and there may be examples where that was actually true. However, I am concerned that a ShotSpotter is sending so many false hits, and we end up sending EMTs to a bunch of places where they don't find somebody shot. They don't even find shell casings there. That ends up wasting time for EMT that could have been going to some other kind of emergency. So I think that that really comes down to really ironing out the process and, or maybe combining it, like a ShotSpotter goes off, can they access a local video camera and see something? I don't really know, but I do have concerns about that argument because I'm not sure that it actually bears out upon further investigation. We do not offer services to police departments to evaluate their policies just because we're a very small nonprofit. I mean, we've grown to about 100 people, but there are 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States. And if we would have to dedicate our entire lives to that. But there are some other organizations out there. I would think that the best way to do it is to find a local ACLU or local community advocates and try to work with them. But on and off, I'm willing to take a look at things as they come in. I just can't offer that as like a proactive service. So the next one, has it become more difficult to regulate banned technologies, become more ubiquitous in consumer devices? Not really. Usually the law ends up making an exception for people who want to unlock their phones with face recognition. Like they don't count that as a face recognition ban. So really not so much. Enforcement may become a problem because it's difficult to know what's on a police officer's phone, especially if you have 1,000 police officers and they're carrying multiple phones each. It's difficult to know whether they've downloaded an app like Clearview without permission. I've seen California Highway Patrol send out like memos to people like when there was a moratorium saying, "Hey, just a reminder, you can't have this on your phone," etc. See, AI police reports, these are supposed to be recording the actual sensory impressions and thoughts of the officer. With AI, instead we will get cookie cutter forms with all the right catchphrases. That is more of a comment that I fully agree with. I think that, one of my concerns as well is that if AI, if you tell the AI, we want you to write it in such a way that's going to result in the most prosecutions with the highest sentencing in the end, that is just going to start using phrases over and over again that work better with judges and juries in prosecution's favor and may not actually be an accurate reflection of what happened. And then so Jason, by the way, asks for the link again. And then I'm familiar with the history of CCOPS ordinances. There have been 2 to 4 local governments each year that have passed one of these. There are about 25 governments to date. But clearly, there are far more police departments using surveillance technologies. What is the future of CCOPS? Does the EFF-ACLU actively engage local governments to get these passed? It feels like the country is racing towards widespread use of technology with the oversight being rarely implemented. All of that is true. It is very difficult for us to take, ACLU has local branches all over, so they're better positioned to take on these battles. And you'll see in places like Massachusetts, you have some very active employees at ACLU who are negotiating city by city by city. EFF does not have the capacity for that. We are sometimes able to support local groups, but beyond that, we just don't have the staff to organize that. However, I think that one way to address it is statewide regulations. If you can get a state of California to do a face recognition ban, well, then you've covered it all at once. So some of those things do help. So in California, for example, we did get a military equipment regulation, which is kind of like CCOPS, but for like military equipment. But in that, robots and drones were covered. So in California, there is a CCOPS process for drones universally across the state. And that really did save a lot of effort than just passing an individual CCOPS ordinance. Hopefully that helped. I think somebody still has their hands up, but I know we're not really taking questions like that in this room. So Tina.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we can't take questions orally because we have that feature turned off. But we will jump over to the Zoom discussion in a minute. I just want to thank you, Dave, for doing this presentation. And of course, thanks everybody who joined us today. If you're able and want to join us for the discussion, you will be able to speak directly with Dave, and he'll actually be able to see your faces and not just speak out into the camera. The link to that discussion is in the chat, and it's also in response to a couple of the questions. And so I will just give you all some time to copy and paste that. So just a couple of reminders. One, Cammie had mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that the registration for the annual NACOLE conference will open this week. So please check the website for that. And we'll also send an email blast when that happens or when we open it. So check your email if you see anything from us and are interested in going to the webinar. For those of you who are not joining the discussion, thank you so much for attending and always supporting NACOLE's efforts, and we hope to see you at a future event. All right, I will just give everyone a few more seconds to make sure you are able to copy and paste that link before I log off.